Okay, so everyone has a loop band or a band that can be tied into a loop, and a lacrosse ball, and foam roller, and a wall. You don't, for the wall one, it doesn't necessarily have to be a wall. We can modify if you have a porch or staircase or something, so it's not extremely important. But okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about knee pain. Obviously, it's a really broad topic. A lot of the patients that come into my clinic, they present, well, knee pain, it could be anywhere around the knee. So I'm going to focus a little bit about anterior knee pain. So anywhere around the kneecap, and just give a couple of tips and tricks on what I typically see in the clinic and how I go about treating it. So it is a generalization, but it's also a really common thing that I see. So anterior knee pain is, like I said, any pain around the kneecap. So it could be above, below, on the sides, underneath. And there's a lot of different causes for it. So I'm gonna talk about the like a common activity that causes knee pain for people, and then a common sign and a sign that I look for when I'm doing my testing. So the two main things are lunges and hiking or running. So it's usually the downhill when people are going, especially on a hike. And it presents usually in the front of the knee. So the one of the biggest tests that I look at is a single leg squat, or like a dynamic single leg squat. So I'm going to demonstrate what I look for and what I'm like what happens when it's a bad one versus a good one, and then you guys can try it as well. Try it again afterwards when you're in front of a mirror, because you can see yourself better. Right now you can just look down at your leg and see what happens. If your balance is really off, you can hold on to a chair or the wall just to do the test. Ideally, you don't hold on to anything. So I'll show you the single leg squat. So I'll go a little bit down here. So typically what happens with a good one is someone's standing on one leg, their arch is in a neutral position, hips are neutral, and as you go down, your knee tracks straight, there's no wibble wobble from side to side, and then you come back up. So what typically happens is the person's arch will collapse inwards, their hips will kind of tilt, and their knee will kind of go inwards. So really, really typical with running and the landing. So if someone lands, they'll land kind of like that. Or if you're doing lunges, especially walking lunges when there's more balance involved, people's knees will kind of cave inwards, either on the way down or on the way up. So this could be a stability issue in the hips, or weakness in the arch muscles or in the hip muscles. So what we're going to do today is kind of test the ankle mobility, look at your arches, see if there's any tightness in your quad. A lot of the time, the easiest fix is if you have tightness in your quad and you can foam roll it out, like foam roll the tension out, and then you redo the test, or you go for a run and it's totally fine. Usually it's not that simple, but I will show you a quad exercise on the roller. Most of you probably have done it before, but I have a couple of little tricks to target the rectus femoris muscle, which is a hip flexor and a knee extender muscle. So it crosses both joints. So any muscle that crosses both joints is more susceptible of getting tight. So anyways, okay, so with the foot, what happens is if your ankle, so if your arch drops inwards, everything is kind of rotating inwards. So we want to look at the hip muscles, the hip external rotators, to see if they can get back into a more neutral position. So everyone can stand up and we'll try the single leg squat. So basically, you're just gonna stand on one leg. Don't focus on anything particular, just do 5 single leg squats and see what happens. Just see if you feel unbalanced, maybe look down to see if your knee is wobbling or caving inwards. I can see a couple people. Yep. Okay, good. And then try the other leg, see if it feels any different or if it's easier, if you have a side that's a bit stronger, or your dominant side sometimes is easier. Okay, good. So pay attention to what you found, and now we're just going to break it down a little bit. So we're going to look at your ankle mobility, because that is one thing that can limit a squat. So we're going to use the wall for this, or if you're on your porch, you can just use the railing. So we're just going to look at. Okay, so what I want you to do is we're going to have your foot right up against the wall. And don't worry about the back leg. The back leg, you can bend, you can let your heel come up. We're only focusing on the front leg. Okay, so you basically want to bring your foot as far away from the wall as possible, but still be able to touch your knee without letting your heel come up. So usually it's around 4 to 5 inches from the wall, but everyone is slightly different. If you've had ankle sprains or broken ankles in the past, this typically is, it's more stiff if you've had an injury. But so 4 to 5 inches is about your hand width. So if you find the spot where your heel starts to come up and then just measure with your hand, you should be about between 4 to 5 inches. So if your knee can easily touch without your heel coming up, then that's a good sign that you have good passive ankle dorsiflexion, is what it's called. Okay, so check the other side, make sure it's the same. If it's not, then we can you can make this test an easy exercise for improving your ankle mobility. So the test becomes the exercise. As long as you feel like if it is below 4 to 5 inches, you want to do the actual exercise. You want to come a little bit more away from the wall, so you're not actually touching the wall, so you actually feel a stretch. So sometimes people feel this in the front of their ankle, or a stretch in the back of the ankle or the calf.
Andy, I just have a question about, I've got one ankle that's can get way further away from the wall than the other one, like twice as far.
Yeah, so I would work on the one that is more limited. If you feel, where do you feel it, in the front or the back of the heel?
It's more in the calf, and then the front, like it just feels like it gets stuck.
Yeah,
and the heel starts to come off.
Yeah, so I mean, without knowing your history or anything that's happened, it is a pretty safe exercise to do. As long as, if you're not feeling a really uncomfortable pinch in the front and mostly a stretch in the back, then you can do that as an exercise. Yeah. Okay. So we'll stick to the foot for a sec. So we're gonna look at the arch muscles now. So I'm gonna put you on the floor here. So basically, what we want to look at is your ability to engage the inner foot muscles. So your inner arch. one of the main muscles is called your tibialis posterior. So if I'm just relaxing, my arches kind of drop inwards like that. So what you want to try to do is lift, so put your weight in your big toes and also on the outer part of the heels. So this is basically what happens when I'm dropping, everything kind of collapses inwards, and then when I lift, you see a little kind of arch there, and then when I drop, it just drops down. So you don't want to put all your weight on your heel or on the outer part of your heel so that your actual inner foot lifts up. You still want to keep your big toes down. Okay. And then just do that a couple of times just to get the feel for it. So you don't want your knees to be moving too much when you're doing this. It's just the foot. So you should feel a little contraction, muscle contraction in the inner foot. Okay? So if you put your band around your feet, we can make this into a bit of a strengthening exercise. So you want to be about hip width, maybe a little bit more apart. Right. And so you want the band pretty close to your ankle bones, like kind of right over them. And then the band is pulling you inwards, so it kind of exaggerates that force inward. So what you want to do is that exact same thing as I just showed you with putting your weight in your big toes and then your outer heels. And then you're just going to try and see if you can hold that. So when you do that, because there's a little bit of extra resistance, you should feel a little bit of a glute activation in kind of the side of your hips. So what you're going to try to do is just a couple back and forth just to get the movement. And then you're going to try and balance, and you can use the wall a little bit for this. So you're going to just hold the arch on the one side and maintain the resistance distance with the other leg and see if you can hold that arch up. And then back down. Right? And then same thing. So really slowly make sure that as you're lifting your other foot, that you're not gripping with your toes on the standing leg. You're using the arch muscle to do it, to hold you up. Okay, so you should feel a little bit more in the glutes as you kind of tick-tock your way back and forth. But this is a great exercise for strengthening your arches as well as your hips without putting a ton of pressure through your knees. The feet and the hips communicate all the time to each other to control what the knees do. So it's really important that you're working on your hips and your feet to support what's going on at your knees. Awesome. Yeah, so you can use that as an exercise. If you wanted to, if you were going to do a workout, you could do that as kind of a primer. You could make it into its own exercise on a daily basis if you wanted to, but it just kind of gets your arches fired and your glutes fired. Okay, so I'm going to show you the roller next. So with the roller, we're going to work on the quad muscle. So there's many different ways to do this. The way I like to do it is focusing on one leg at a time. So if you grab your roller and then you lay on it with one leg, like this, okay? And an angle here. So one leg is just out to the side. You're kind of in a forearm plank. Okay, and the idea is just really slowly roll up and down the front of the quad. So you want to be kind of close to the edge of the roller so you have room for your other leg. And then you just want to find the spots that feel tight, sore, achy. And then my little extra that I usually add to this is bending the knee. So because that quad attaches to your hip as well, when you bend your knee, it puts it more on stretch. What typically happens with people is that they end up dumping through their low back. So you really want to try to stay in that core brace and don't let your back sink down. It makes it a little bit harder because your pelvis is in a neutral position. If you dump your lower back, it makes it easier to bend your knee and it puts more pressure on your back. So we want to try to isolate as much as possible. Okay. If you have shoulder issues, you could do it with your hands straight. You just have to watch what your lower back is doing. Okay. Awesome. So you can do that on both sides. If you try the other side, see what it feels like. See if there's more spots or if it just feels more uncomfortable or less uncomfortable. That way you can focus on that side when we're done. Yeah. So yeah, what I typically like to, I mean, you can do it any way you want. What I usually will do is I'll roll with my leg straight until I find a spot. And then once I find that spot, then I'll just stay on that spot, bend my knee until it kind of loosens up, and then find another spot with my knee straight and then bend on there. Sometimes it can be a little bit uncomfortable if you keep your knee bent and you just aggressively roll up and down. It doesn't, I find it's not as relaxing. Like it hurts regardless, but it's a little more tolerable if you find one spot and just go up and down on it. So Louise, straighten your knee first, and then find a spot that's nasty, and then stay on it, and then bend your knee without rolling. So just stay on the one spot. And then, yeah. Okay, awesome. So we're gonna go up to the hip now. So we're just gonna use the lacrosse ball on your hip. Most of you probably already know this one, but I find it really helpful just because there's a lot of different layers on the side of the hip, a lot of different layers of muscles on the side of the hip. So you can choose to do this on the wall or the floor. The floor is gonna be more uncomfortable because it's gonna be your body weight. So I'll just show you against the wall. Okay, so if you use your hand and you kind of start with the palm of your hand on the top of your pelvis and just make a hand mark, your glutes basically span the entire part of your hand. So where my thumb is going to be gluteus minimus and part of medius. Back where the rest of my fingers are is going to be gluteus medius, your piriformis, your external rotators, and then your glute max. So we're focusing on the external rotators and the abductors, so more piriformis, the deeper hip rotators, and then your gluteus medius and minimus. So you can either be directly on the side, in between the hip bone and the pelvic bone, right there, it's a meaty part of the muscle, and then just slightly back behind the hip joint. Okay, so you can just put the ball there and then lean against the wall. This is this similar weight distribution as the lower back muscle. So you want to put your weight on the opposite leg and only like 5% of your weight on the leg that you're working on. And then again, same thing, you just want to roll up and down really slowly, find the spots that feel tight, and then just relax. So Louise, just rest your leg down, but don't put any weight on it. Like, yeah, most of your weight's on your other leg. The reason is because if you lifted your leg, you're gonna use some of those muscles to hold your leg up. And if you put all your weight down, it's the same thing. You're using those muscles, so you just kind of want it to be rested on the floor, but it's still relaxed. And then you can just kind of move all around the hip. You'll feel the bony landmarks as you roll. And the muscles go in all different directions. So you'll sometimes like roll over the muscles, which is okay. You're trying to find the spots that are tight and maybe even referring to the side of the leg or the knee, which is okay. It's just a typical referral spot is down the leg, but you just want to stay on it until it kind of starts to fade. Okay. So this is another way to wake up the muscle. So it doesn't necessarily, just because you have a single leg squat and your knee wobbles from side to side, doesn't mean it's necessarily weak. It could mean that it's just sleeping. So a simple thing like lacrosse balling it can actually help you okay, Brigitte? Can actually help the activation and help the movement itself. We're gonna add an activation exercise to this after you guys are done both sides. So usually people are tight on both sides, but sometimes one side is worse than the other. We're going to do a little bit of an activation and balance exercise with this. So you'll probably need something to hold on to for this. It's again, it's a lot less, it's not straining on the knees, but it really gets those hip external rotators firing when in standing on one leg. Okay, so I'm going to start on one leg, so I'm on my left leg. You want to stay really braced for this. So the movement is coming, you're pivoting on your hip, your pelvis and your torso are in line with each other. So they stay in the same plane of motion as we move. So definitely hold on for the first few reps because it's pretty challenging to do. So you're gonna look down at your foot, make sure your arch is lifted, like how we just did in the very first part. And then what you're gonna do is just lean forward a little bit. So I'm kind of here, slight bend in my knee, nothing too crazy, like not in a squat or anything, just a soft bend in the knee. And then what I'm doing is I'm rotating my whole body on my hip joint. And then I'm gonna go downwards. So from front, it looks like this. I'm going past, which is called adduction, and then abduction. So I'm kind of in like a deadlift position a little bit. My whole torso is tight, core on, and I'm just rotating like that. So bring your attention back to your foot. Make sure you haven't lost that arch. The slower you go, the better, because we're learning muscle coordination and activation. So you don't want to, if you just go quickly, fast, you're going to lose your balance, your arch muscle is going to let go. So you really want to focus on the arch. Yeah, I feel that. I feel it too. Okay, so let's switch sides. You'll just have to bring your chair on the other side. And then slight bend in your knee, slight lean forward. And you can play around with this, like you can lean forward as much as you want. The more you lean forward, the more strain is going to be on those hip rotators. They're just putting them in a different position. So you can really play around with your angles and just see how open you can get your hip, and then see how much you can close it in. Yep. Yeah. So this one might be, it's a challenging exercise because it requires coordination. So I would say with everybody that's on right now that I can see, try to see if you can bring the leg that's not standing back a little bit more. Almost as if you're like in an airplane and your leg and your torso are in the same pulling motion. So I'm just like, yeah. Yep, and then just play around with how far you can go. Nice and slow. Make sure. Yep, Louise, keep that big toe down. Nice. Yeah, so these are a couple of tests and little tricks and techniques that I typically will use on people that come into the clinic with knee pain. Obviously, it's a generalization, but if you look at, sorry, I just got a notification that our time's almost up. Yeah, if you take a look at those things, like your ankle and your hip, it just kind of opens your mind to way more exercises that you can do to help target knee pain. We can unmute. I don't know how to unmute everybody at the same time, but if you have any questions, we have a few minutes to chat if you want.
That last one was difficult.
Yeah, I usually recommend holding on to something, something sturdy, while you're first doing it, and then eventually you can take your hand off. But it's a pretty challenging dynamic balance exercise. But if you think about how like running seems so easy, but it's actually a skill, and if you don't have the components of the stride, then it's going to be eventually wear and tear happens or breakdown of tissue happens, right? So yeah. Anybody have any other questions? Or
so when I was just doing that one, when I stood on my good knee,
yeah,
I seem to have way better range
yep,
than when I stand on my bad knees. Does that make sense?
yeah. So there's probably less control happening at your hip or ankle. Obviously, like a detailed assessment would make more sense to do, but just from that, like if you've had an injury somewhere along that side, what happens is you can lose proprioception, which is like basically body awareness. So we have all these little receptors in our joints that tell us where we are in space. And if so an injury or like arthritis or whatever can reduce that awareness. So it makes the muscles have to work harder, but they're confused and they don't know, like with timing, they don't know like when to turn on or how to stabilize. And that can make an exercise harder on a painful side.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, Brandy.
Yes.
I'm feeling it a lot right under here right now.
Behind your knee?
Yeah, we know I'm tight, so I'm trying to roll it out. But is there any specific thing to warm that up?
I don't think I've taken a look at your knee before. Is that the same side as the, I'm just going to stop recording here. Hold on.